People who were in a coma. What change surprised you when you woke up? I was in a coma for close to 6 weeks. When I woke, I had to learn everything again. I had most of my speech abilities, but my motor control was horrid. I had to figure out how to wipe as well as walk up and down stairs again. That took about 3 weeks. I had lost a ton of weight too. I was 6 feet 3 inches and weighed about 145. I was in a coma for a month, and the doctor told me, "You're the first person I've ever seen gain weight in a coma." I gained 10 pounds and had stretch marks on my hips. I was in a coma for 4 days from bacterial meningitis. When I woke up, I was completely deaf. I had to communicate with my parents and doctors with a notepad and pen. Some hearing gradually returned in my left ear, but the right ear is still 100% deaf to this day. Same here. Got me when I was 9. I was in a coma for 6 days. When I woke up, it was like I regressed 5 years. I was adopted when I was 6, so I super upset because my parents weren't there and I couldn't understand why. Most eventually came back, but not nearly to the point I was at before. Affected my intelligence too. Couldn't read or do math. I had skipped the 2nd grade. By the time I was able to go back to school, I was put back into my age group. I've had trouble with long-term memory ever since. Still have seizures. My nephew, 14, was in a medically induced coma for over 3 months. During that time, he had lost about 30% of his body weight as his muscles atrophied. His first remark upon seeing himself for the first time was, "Did you forget to feed me?" Which was incredibly hard to hear since his family had sat crying at his bedside every moment he was unconscious. I gotta give your nephew points. He chose some good words for his re-entry. Friend of mine during childhood was in a coma for 3 months. The doctors were not optimistic and he flatlined several times. His family had a rotation where someone was always with him night and day. One day they're getting up to go to dinner and halfway out the door he says, "Hey, where are you going?" And the entire room freezes. His entire family burst into tears. The nurses come in, they burst into tears. A doctor comes, he bursts into tears. Everyone is crying. Full recovery, doing great to this day. I'm sorry, but that might be funniest reaction I've seen on this thread. A good friend of our family went into a coma for half a year. Finally, when he woke up, he was stunned why his wife looked so old. He actually lost the last 15 years of his memory. He knew he had 2 children, but they were babies and he didn't even know about his 3rd child. And the memory never came back. He skipped from no mobile phones to smartphones, to laptops. Everything was new to him. Being stuck in early 90s but actually being in the 2000s, there was a lot of change to handle. But learning you missed all your children growing up, was the hardest for him. About 20 years ago, my cousin had a severe head injury from a fall. He was about 20 at the time. A was in a coma for almost 4 weeks. When he woke up, he fairly quickly discovered that his memory was eidetic. He could repeat entire conversations back word for word, and even tell you the date and time you said something. Also, he could memorize images with just a few seconds glance. His memory is still eidetic today. It's annoying. Whenever he reminds me of something I said in the past, usually something I can't even remember, I suggest that we hit him in the head again. I was in a coma for 9 days. When I woke up, I was still on a ventilator. When they took me off the ventilator, my body didn't remember to breathe on its own. I literally had to relearn how to breathe. Took me a few days. I had no natural sense for how long or deeply to inhale, how long to hold it, how long to exhale. I had to put all my mental focus towards breathing. It was really weird. Back in the 90s, my great-grandfather had a stroke. He was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when he woke up, he could not speak English. All he could speak was the Choctaw language. He had learned it when he was a kid, because his family lived right near a Choctaw reserve, and he played with a lot of those kids. He spoke it fluently at that time, but forgot it over his life to where he couldn't remember any of it by this time. This went on for around 10 days, and then he woke up from a night's sleep and could suddenly speak only English again, not remembering a word of Choctaw. He was also able to repeat verbatim every conversation that had been held in the room that he was in. My wife was in a coma. 2 weeks medically induced. When she woke, she had very wrong memories. They were all based on conversations people had while in the room with her. For example, she thought they flew her to Washington, D.C. for treatment. While she was in a coma, My father-in-law mentioned how he just flew back into town from DC on a work trip. Somehow, she overheard this while out and her brain interpreted it to mean she flew to DC. Even after we explained to her the reality of where she was, it took days for her to come to terms with reality. Edit, she was in a coma about 10 years ago. She is not currently in a coma. My brother-in-law had a brain tumor, so he was out for a while when he was first brought to the hospital. The nurses happened to be of Asian descent, so when he was awake he kept apologizing to people for making them have to come to Japan to see him. That's funny. It's situations like that you have to find humor when you can. My wife and I laugh now about all the crazy stuff she believed happened. How does time work in a coma? Did it feel as if it was one night, or could she tell while she was sleeping that it was lasting longer than usual? Could she even think to herself at all while in a coma? Her time was all off. When she came to, she thought our kids were still younger than they were. Best way I can explain it, you know, sometimes you wake up from a deep sleep and are really confused and possibly still dreaming, but it only lasts a few seconds? This lasted for days.